You didn't imagine it. You didn't overreact. And no, you weren't too sensitive. What you went through was real. The gaslighting, the walking on eggshells, the feeling like you were slowly disappearing in the presence of someone who claimed to love you. If you've ever found yourself in the arms of a narcissist, you know the aftermath isn't just about heartbreak. It's about soul recovery. This isn't just a talk about moving on. This is about becoming whole again. Because the pieces of you that were scattered, silenced, or shamed, they're still there. And today, we're calling them back. Let's walk through transformational truths that will help you reclaim your self-worth, rebuild your identity, and rise stronger than ever before. You didn't lose yourself. That's the lie you may have come to believe after months or years of being in a relationship that slowly wore away at your self-trust. What actually happened was far more painful and far more important to understand. You were overridden. Slowly, gradually, without fanfare or force, your thoughts were dismissed, your feelings minimized, your instincts questioned. You were taught, conditioned, really, to second-guess yourself at every turn. And it didn't happen overnight. It happened through countless micro-moments. Moments when you bit your tongue to avoid conflict. Moments when you convinced yourself that your needs were too much. Moments when you were told, directly or indirectly, that love meant compromising your voice for the sake of peace. What was being chipped away wasn't your worth. It was your connection to it. And the thing is, you're not crazy for missing the version of love you thought you had. Because in the beginning, it didn't feel like suppression. It felt like magic, like being chosen, like finally being seen. But what you were seeing was a mirror, not a window. You were shown what they wanted you to see. And then slowly, that mirror was turned on you, reflecting back every insecurity, every flaw, every fear you confided in them. And it was used against you. That's how narcissistic dynamics work. They don't erase you. They confuse you into thinking that who you are isn't acceptable, and then they present themselves as the only one who will ever tolerate you. That's not love. That's conditioning. That's control dressed up as devotion. Now here you are, out of the relationship, but still carrying the aftershocks. You find yourself questioning your judgment, wondering if you were too naive, if you should have left sooner, if your trust is even worth giving again. But I want you to hear this clearly. You are not broken. You are not foolish. You are someone who loved deeply, and in the process, you were taught not to trust the very thing that was trying to protect you, your own inner voice. But it's still there. It didn't disappear. It's been whispering beneath the noise, waiting for you to believe in it again. The work now isn't to become someone else. The work is to return, to come back to the version of you that existed before you learned to doubt yourself. That person isn't gone. That person is who survived. And in her survival is your strength. Now let's talk about that beginning phase of the relationship. The part you probably revisit in your mind, wondering how someone who treated you so beautifully in the beginning became the source of your deepest wounds. That early phase wasn't love. It was a strategy. We call it love bombing, but that term almost doesn't capture the emotional intoxication it creates. It's the good morning texts, the flattery, the whirlwind promises. It's someone making you feel like you are the most extraordinary person they've ever met. And you believe it, not because you're gullible, but because you're human. Because deep down, we all want to feel chosen. We want to feel seen. But healthy love doesn't need to put on a show. It doesn't need to rush the process or overwhelm your senses. Healthy love reveals itself slowly, through consistency, honesty, and care that doesn't require a spotlight. What you received wasn't intimacy, it was intensity. And intensity can feel like intimacy when we're not used to real, grounded connection. Intensity floods the system, keeps you from asking questions, from noticing red flags, from pausing to evaluate. That's the whole point. The goal isn't to get to know you, it's to get you invested. So by the time things start to shift, when the charm gives way to criticism, when the compliments turn to comparisons, when your joy becomes a threat, you're already hooked. That's why the sudden withdrawal hurts so much. Because you weren't just losing someone, you were losing the version of yourself they allowed you to be in the beginning. That version that felt radiant, desired, worthy. But you need to understand, that version of you is real. The way they made you feel was not proof of their love. It was proof of your capacity to shine when you feel safe. That light came from you. They didn't give it to you. They simply reflected it back for a moment. And then they punished you for having it. So when you look back on the love bombing phase and feel yourself longing for it, remind yourself, what you miss is the feeling of being seen, of being valued. That's not weakness. That's longing. That's human. But it's not a reason to return. Because the price you paid to feel that validation was your peace, your self-respect, your ability to breathe without tension. You can grieve that experience without romanticizing it. You can acknowledge the good moments without erasing the truth. And if you're still struggling with how quickly things shifted, how the same person who made you feel special became the one who left you doubting everything, remember, there's a difference between someone changing and someone revealing themselves. The beginning wasn't a glimpse of who they are. It was a mask. What came after was the truth. And that truth is what your heart deserves to heal from. The good news is, you are not powerless. You have the ability to rebuild your sense of self, not from who you were before the relationship, but from who you are now, having lived through it, survived it, and learned from it. You don't need their apology. You don't need their closure. You only need to trust that the part of you that sees clearly now, the part that feels uncomfortable when something's off, that's your compass. And this time it's pointing back to you. How many times did you feel it? That tightness in your chest. That quiet voice saying, something isn't right. That moment where your body gave you a signal, hesitation, discomfort, a flicker of fear. And how many times did you push it aside? How many times did you silence your own intuition just to keep the peace, to avoid the fight, to hold on to what you thought was love? It's heartbreaking, really. Because your intuition wasn't just a feeling, it was your inner protector. And every time you negotiated with it, every time you told yourself you were being too dramatic, too needy, too emotional, you were disconnecting from the part of you that's been trying to keep you safe your entire life. And let's be honest, it didn't come from nowhere. That impulse to override yourself was taught, conditioned. Somewhere along the way, you learned that being loved meant being agreeable. That keeping someone close meant shrinking yourself. That if you made too much noise, they'd leave. And so, slowly, you started editing yourself, filtering your truth, doubting your instincts, until what was once a loud, clear no became a hesitant, maybe I'm overreacting. Here's the reality. We don't negotiate with our intuition unless we're afraid of what it's telling us. Because deep down you knew. You knew when the compliments started to feel transactional. You knew when your boundaries were being crossed and called overreactions. You knew when you started to feel smaller in a space that was supposed to help you grow. But because you were emotionally invested, because you believed in their potential, because you so badly wanted to be wrong, you stayed. And you gave yourself 100 reasons to ignore what your gut was screaming. But now that you're out, you can look back and see what your intuition was trying to say all along. It wasn't trying to scare you. It wasn't trying to sabotage a good thing. It was trying to save you. And maybe this is the first time in your life that you're being asked to trust it again. To believe that you know what safe feels like. What love sounds like. What respect looks like. And not in hindsight, but in real time. You don't owe anyone your silence. You don't need to justify your discomfort. You are allowed to walk away without a good enough reason. Because if your body doesn't feel safe, that is the reason. And that isn't selfish, it's sacred. You've done enough of explaining away your needs, softening your truth, quieting your alarm bells. The new version of you? She listens. She trusts. She doesn't argue with her instincts, she honors them. Now let's talk about how this kind of relationship leaves you, not just emotionally wounded, but exhausted on every level. There's this deep, gnawing fatigue that comes from constantly trying to manage someone else's moods. From tiptoeing around unpredictable reactions. From explaining yourself over and over, just to be misunderstood anyway. You start to feel like you're failing at love, like you're not doing enough, like you're somehow to blame for why everything feels so heavy. But here's the truth, you're not broken. You're tired. And that tiredness isn't just about a lack of sleep. It's about the emotional weight you carried for two people. You were managing your emotions and theirs. You were trying to stay calm, stay kind, stay connected, even when you weren't being met halfway. That takes a toll. It wears you down. And eventually, you forget what it feels like to be emotionally safe. You forget what it feels like to just be, without proving, without defending, without shrinking. And when you're that emotionally worn out, you start to believe that maybe you're the problem. That maybe love is supposed to be hard like this. That maybe you're just not built for relationships. But none of that is true. You're not broken. You're someone who gave and gave until you had nothing left to give. And now, your soul is asking for rest. Not because it's weak, but because it's ready to be rebuilt on something stronger. You don't need to fix yourself. You need to restore yourself. You need to come back to center. To relearn what it feels like to be at peace in your own presence. To sit in silence and not feel anxious. To wake up and not be bracing for the next emotional hit. That's not just healing, it's liberation. And it starts with recognizing that your exhaustion is not a flaw. It's a sign, a message from your body that says, I've been carrying too much for too long. So take the rest. Take the space. Take the time. The world will keep spinning. People will keep having their opinions. But you need the season to just be. No fixing. No proving. Just reconnecting. With your intuition. With your strength. With your sense of self that was never lost. Only buried under the rubble of someone else's dysfunction. And as you do, you'll start to feel the fatigue lift. Not all at once. Not overnight. But gradually, as the noise fades, as your inner voice gets louder, as your body feels lighter, you'll realize the person you thought was gone, she's still here. And she's ready to rise. You didn't fail. And I know that might be hard to believe right now. Especially when you replay all the moments you stayed, all the red flags you ignored, all the chances you gave. Especially when people ask, why didn't you leave sooner? Or worse, when you ask yourself that question in the dark, when no one's watching and the guilt starts to eat at you. But let me say this with absolute clarity. Staying in a relationship where you hope things would change is not failure. Loving someone who couldn't love you in return is not failure. Holding on because you believed in someone's potential is not failure. That is faith. That is hope. That is you doing what so many people do, trying to make love work. But here's what matters more than what you endured, that you woke up. That at some point, something inside you whispered, this isn't what love should feel like. That despite everything you gave, you finally chose to give something back to yourself. Your energy, your clarity, your peace. Growth doesn't always look graceful. Sometimes it looks like breaking down in the car because you know deep down that something needs to end. Sometimes it looks like rereading old messages just to remind yourself it wasn't all in your head. And sometimes it looks like walking away, not with certainty, but with courage. What you went through changed you. It taught you how to listen more closely to yourself. How to discern what love feels like versus what it only looks like on the surface. And that kind of growth doesn't happen in perfect circumstances. It happens in the mess. In the moments where you have to choose between being comfortable and being honest. In the moments where you feel the loneliness hit, but you still choose not to go back. That's growth. That's strength. And it's something to be proud of, not ashamed of. You didn't waste time. That's another lie we tell ourselves after these kinds of relationships. We mourn the years we gave, the plans we made, the identity we built around a future that never came. But even in that pain, something powerful happened. You learned about yourself. You learned what your boundaries are by seeing them crossed. You learned what manipulation sounds like by being spoken to in ways that twisted your words and made you question your worth. You learned what you don't want, and that clarity, that's priceless. Because now, moving forward, you're not going to settle for emotional breadcrumbs. You're not going to excuse behavior that feels off. You're not going to fight for someone who isn't showing up to fight for you. Not anymore. That version of you, the one who tolerated what should have never been tolerated, she's not in charge anymore. You are. The you who knows better. the you who feels deeper, the you who chooses peace over potential. And this is where we move into something most people misunderstand after they've been hurt: boundaries. We're often taught that setting boundaries means building walls, that we'll become cold, unreachable, that we'll miss out on love if we start being too picky or too hard to please. But boundaries aren't walls. They're invitations. They say, "This is how I deserve to be treated if you want to be close to me." They don't push people away. They filter out the wrong ones. And they attract the ones who can meet you where you are. When you've been in a relationship with a narcissist, boundaries become vital, not just for protecting yourself, but for retraining your nervous system to recognize safety. Because when you've gotten used to chaos, when love was laced with anxiety, when affection came after arguments and apologies, your baseline becomes distorted. You start associating intensity with passion, inconsistency with excitement. That's not your fault. That's trauma bonding. And breaking that pattern starts with boundaries. You get to decide what feels safe now. You get to say no, even when there's chemistry. You get to take your time, even when they're rushing. You get to ask questions, to have standards, to expect reciprocity. That's not being difficult. That's being healed. And here's the beautiful part. The people who are meant for you, the ones who are emotionally available, respectful, consistent, they won't mind your boundaries. They'll be relieved by them, because they're looking for the same thing you are: something honest, something whole, something real. You may worry that by setting boundaries, you'll end up alone. But what's lonelier, being alone in your peace, or being with someone and still feeling unseen, unheard, unloved? One is solitude. The other is self-abandonment. And you've already done that once. This time, you get to choose differently. This time, you're not bending to fit someone else's capacity. You're expanding into your own. And maybe that scares you a little. This idea of being firm, of risking connection to stay true to yourself. But what if I told you that the more you respect your own boundaries, the more you give others a blueprint for how to love you? What if I told you that the next great love of your life might only find you because you didn't lower your standards? Because you waited. Because you healed. Because you said, "This is who I am. This is what I need. And I'm no longer willing to negotiate with my own soul to keep someone around." Boundaries are the new beginning, not the end. They're the doorway to relationships where you don't have to explain your worth, where love isn't earned through sacrifice, where your peace is protected, not threatened. And from now on, that's the only kind of love you accept. When you're finally out of something that consumed you, something that drained you emotionally, spiritually, mentally, you realize just how much of yourself you put on hold. The parts of you that used to feel vibrant, expressive, joyful, they've gone quiet. Not because they disappeared, but because you didn't feel safe enough to bring them forward anymore. You stopped dancing in the kitchen. You stopped singing in the car. You stopped laughing at your own jokes, wearing that bold lipstick, going for spontaneous walks, calling the friends who made you feel seen. It wasn't intentional, it was survival. And now, standing in the space where that relationship used to live, you're left with a question. Who am I when I'm not shrinking for someone else's comfort? That question might feel terrifying at first. Because when your whole world revolved around managing someone else's moods, trying to predict their reactions, trying to keep love from being taken away, you start to forget who you were before the performance began. But here's the beautiful truth. You don't have to go back to who you were before. You're not returning to a past version of yourself. You're rediscovering someone wiser, someone more grounded, someone who can now choose what parts of her joy she wants to bring forward. Not out of fear, not to be accepted, but because she deserves to feel alive again. Joy is not a luxury. Joy is not something you earn after enough healing. Joy is part of the healing. Every time you laugh again, genuinely, freely, you're reminding your nervous system that it's safe now. Every time you let yourself feel wonder, or desire, or stillness without guilt, you're repairing the emotional circuitry that once only fired in response to danger. Healing isn't only about dissecting the pain, it's about remembering the light. So go back to the things that lit you up. The hobbies, the people, the places, the rituals that made you feel like your spirit was in the room. Don't wait for the right moment or until you're fully healed. Healing happens in the living, not in isolation, not in endless introspection, in the laughter, in the movement, in the curiosity. You don't have to explain it to anyone. You don't need permission to take up space with your joy again. Whether it's as simple as wearing clothes that make you feel beautiful or as big as booking a solo trip, these acts of self-expression are not selfish. They are the antidote to everything you were told you had to mute. Joy is a declaration that you are not what someone did to you. You are not the worst day you had. You are not the relationship that failed. You are someone who feels. Someone who chooses life again. And again. And again. And maybe the most powerful part of this entire journey is realizing that your next great relationship isn't with someone new. It's with yourself. That's not a cliche. That's a requirement. Because after being in a dynamic where your value was constantly negotiated, questioned, or disregarded, the deepest wound left behind is this. Can I trust myself again? And that's the work now. Rebuilding the trust. Not in someone else. Not yet. But in your own choices. In your voice. In your ability to protect yourself, advocate for yourself, and walk away when something doesn't feel right. You might not feel ready to love someone else. And that's okay. Because the most important relationship in your life is the one you're building with the mirror. That quiet moment in the morning when you ask, what do I need today? That decision to rest instead of overperform. That refusal to chase someone who pulls away. That instinct to say no, firmly, kindly, but without apology. All of that is self-love in action. And it matters more than you think. You're not just healing. You're becoming someone who no longer abandons herself to keep others close. That's a powerful transformation. And that's what protects you more than any red flag checklist or dating advice ever will. When you trust yourself, you can walk into any room, into any relationship, and know, even if this doesn't work out, I won't lose myself this time. That's freedom. That's peace. That's wholeness. And the beautiful thing? The more deeply you commit to that relationship with yourself, the more magnetic you become. Because you're no longer looking for someone to complete you. You're not looking to be rescued, saved, validated. You're looking to share, to co-create, to grow with someone, not shrink for them. And that changes everything. Because you're no longer choosing from a place of lack. You're choosing from a place of fullness, of clarity, of knowing exactly who you are and what you will and will not accept. You might be scared of being alone, but being alone in your truth is far less lonely than being with someone who makes you feel invisible. And right now, as you stand in this new chapter, I want you to remember something. You're not waiting to be chosen anymore. You are choosing your joy, your voice, your boundaries, your peace. You are choosing the life you want, even if it means walking it alone for a while. Because you know now, deeply, fully, that the relationship you have with yourself sets the tone for every other connection in your life. And when that relationship is strong, everything else rises to meet it. You've been through the fire, and yet here you are, rising, stronger, wiser, whole. Now let's keep this healing going. Drop a comment below. Share your story, your strength, your breakthrough. Your words might be exactly what someone else needs today. If this spoke to your heart, give it a like, share it with someone who's walking this journey too, and don't forget to subscribe so you never miss a moment of healing, clarity, and empowerment. And hey, what should we talk about next? Leave your ideas below. This space is yours. Let's grow together.